First Lady Britainy Beshear is known for her advocacy in combating human trafficking and supporting victims of domestic violence. The California native has helped Kentucky families rally through a global pandemic and a series of natural disasters. What inspires her? What motivates her to get involved? On this episode, we'll learn more about the life of the First Lady. This is Red and Bold. First Lady Beshear, it is truly an honor to have you here today with us and talking to the Cardinal community. It's just such a really great thing for our students and our faculty and staff to hear from our public servants, for people who are so engaged and passionate about the work they do. So thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. I think, a lot of people clearly know a lot about the governor, but maybe not so much about the First Lady. And I know your beginnings were in California. I remember you talking to me about this when we were in the box last year and, growing up in California. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about, your life in California? I guess what are the influences that shaped you and maybe molded you to sort of the person you are today?
Sure. Well, I was born in Northern California in this tiny little gold rush town called Auburn. My mom likes to tell me that I was a month overdue, which is why I was born there, because they were in the process of moving. So she had no doctor and went to her parents' house. It's where my grandparents lived. It's where I spent a lot of my summers and every Christmas. We lived in Central California until I was 5, and then we moved down to Southern California, where I spent the remainder of my childhood. And, living near the ocean was amazing.
Yeah.
The traffic. I go back now and I think, how did I manage it?
So was it near San Diego?
As just south of LA.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But I will say that, I had, I think for all intents and purposes, a very normal childhood. I was very close with my grandparents. They were amazing people. My grandfather had, a rough childhood. Sure. And had an alcoholic father and a mother who really tried her very best to raise 2 boys during the Depression. Sure. My grandmother grew up on a ranch. Her father was a horticulturist. And so she had a very kind of carefree childhood, hard worker, loving, just, that sweet, precious grandmother. I just would sit in the kitchen and bake with her, or just being in her presence just, made me feel so safe and at home. So I'm very lucky to have those influences in my life. And and never thought that I would live in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But I met Andy in D.C., and now I would be hard-pressed to leave this state. It has given me friends. It has given me family, community. I love everything about Kentucky. So I'm so glad I wound up here.
Well, I had the pleasure of listening to one of your podcasts with the governor. Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about this Cantina Marina. There was a little bit of a conversation there.
Well, it depends on how you frame it. It was either a restaurant or a bar. And it really, I'm not sure. The two can be the same, but not in this instance. I feel very confident that it is no longer there. I don't know if the health department shut it down or, it might have floated away because it was on the dock in Washington, D.C. But Andy lived in a house. He had several roommates, and one of his roommates was my friend. And she invited me to another roommate's birthday party at Cantina Marina, and that's where I met Andy.
Oh, so that's where the love story began.
That's where it began.
So what were you doing in D.C. at the time?
I was working in marketing, and it was so interesting because I had gone to undergrad at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and I moved back to LA for grad school at USC.
Oh, okay.
And I was living at the beach, and it was wonderful and amazing. But I think, when you're in your early 20s, at least for me, it was a challenge because you're kind of thrown into being an adult. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't have a ton of direction. And I just felt like I needed to do something different, and I needed to kind of move away from where I had grown up and just have a different experience. And when you're young in your 20s, I had a friend's couch that I slept on and got a job and that's how I got to DC. And were it not for that, I would not have met Andy.
Sure. Wow. And, it's funny how life changes your journey, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I came to US in 91, thought I was coming here for 3 years, and here I am all these years later on. Yeah. Did you ever foresee that, your life would be somehow involved in public service, whatever shape that might have taken?
It was not on the bingo card
Not on the bingo card at all.
No. I loved Andy. I knew that we would have a good life together. He had a great profession in being a lawyer. And as we went along, and his dad being governor was also not in the cards. I mean, he and Andy talked about how he was going to retire to the golf course. And so actually why Andy moved back to Kentucky, really, he wanted to practice law with his dad before his dad retired. Wow. And, it's history now. It's
history,
and here we are. And so I think we really saw that if Andy wanted to be in public service, being in the Attorney General at the time for him was I think the most amazing job, for an attorney. And you can make a lot of tangible difference in that job if you choose to use the office the way that he did, really going after child predators, helping seniors who had been scammed out of their retirement, a lot of tangible things. And then we talked about whether or not he was going to run for governor, and here we are. And it's been a wild ride. I did not anticipate being in public office, but I love that it has given me a soapbox and a platform on which to really try to make a difference for the people of this state that I truly have come to love. Yeah.
And we'll get into some of the things that you're very passionate about and engaged about in a second. But I guess, first of all, like to the change in your life from the wife of the Attorney General to the First Lady of the state. And of course, your children, Will and Lila, were very young at this point, and they were sort of settled in Louisville, uprooted, to Lexington. How was that for the family? I mean, was that, hard? And I guess, maybe can you tell us how have you protected them from, for them to have their childhood without the glare of the media and all of that? It must be very difficult.
Well, my number one job is being a mom. Everything else is secondary. And so as Andy was campaigning, it's sort of the divide and conquer. Yeah. He could do that. But what I will say on a side note is that Andy made a point of being home every morning to see the kids off to school. So even if he couldn't see them at night, he would get home at 2 a.m. to see the kids. And there might have been 2 times, that he couldn't get home. Sure. My job was to keep their lives as normal as possible. So making sure they got to school, got to their activities, went to their friends' houses, went on the field trips, got to the grocery store, the things that keep your family running. Yeah. And so I hope that they did not feel, that things were too different. And also at the time, they were young. So they were watching Disney Junior and Nick Jr. And so a lot of the negativity surrounding campaigns was not on their radar, and we made it a priority to make sure that was not in their life. And they were at a great school that protected them, and their friends didn't think twice about it. And so I think life went pretty smoothly. And when we did move to Frankfort, we decided to
Sorry,
move.
I said Lexington, didn't I? Frankfort.
It's okay.
Oh dear.
That's okay. So we moved from Louisville to Frankfort, and we gave them choices. So they could continue going to the school that they had attended in Louisville, because while it's an hour drive, that's not a short distance, but it was close enough that we felt like that was something, if they wanted to do, that they should have that choice. Will still played with the same baseball team, so we tried to keep things in their lives as normal as possible, which for them meant they just moved houses. They didn't really skip a beat in their day-to-day life. And then COVID hit. So, all of those things didn't matter as much, but, we had a roof over our heads and food on the table. So we got to spend some time together that we would not have otherwise had.
Yeah, it was an amazing time for all of us, right? When we think back, I remember, we had all of my 5 boys in the house at the time too. We had
That's
3
awesome.
graduations going on that year, and they didn't get to do any of them.
Yeah.
And it was just really an amazing time. And I think you'd mentioned you got a dog at that time. When it's amazing how many dogs we have in our subdivision around that time.
It's amazing. So we had our older dog, Winnie, or Maddie, excuse me, and she was a full poodle. And our neighbors across the street from us in Louisville had gotten Winnie as a puppy, and they could not keep her.
Oh.
And they said, "You have a poodle. Would you like to have another one?" And of course, at the time, you look at this sweet puppy and you think,
yes, your heart melts.
You can't say no. Winnie is definitely a Labradoodle, and it's really funny because you see the poodle side and then the lab side kicks in, and they're 2 very different Winnies. And so she was a gift that we did not anticipate at that time. But when we lost Maddie at the beginning of COVID, having Winnie there made a huge difference.
Yes.
And I was telling you this story. So Winnie, like many of our dogs, was a COVID dog and just assumed that life meant everybody was home with her every day, all the time. And as things began to open up and I was actually leaving the house, Winnie was not on board with this plan, and she left me a present in my closet. So I felt like that was a very personal
message. Very direct.
It was
very direct.
Yes.
Yes, our animals. And I know, of course, Will is so much into baseball, and I think Lila's into more equestrian.
Yes, she events.
Yeah.
And they're both very good at what they do and both love what they do. And, as a parent, watching your kids do what they love and finding success and also growing through failures is really, it's special to watch.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. And now we kind of maybe will switch to more maybe serious issues because, I think everybody recognizes, and hopefully they do, that, you're in a position that really is out there in the public domain, and you have the ability to influence, voices, to move things. And I know certainly you and Governor Beshear are a partnership and all the things that, you work on together. So I know from the standpoint of human trafficking, particularly is an area that you have really leaned into on many areas, but human trafficking in particular. Can you talk to us about, how you got into that and I guess, your journey and I guess, for our listeners, what are the things that people can do to help, to be more aware, to be assistants? So maybe you could talk us through that.
Yes, that is a very big open-ended question. So,
I want to give you as much breadth in that conversation because it's a serious conversation.
Absolutely it is. And I will say that I love that as today as a society, I think we really have reframed the conversation around what trafficking is. And how I really sort of found this as a passion of mine was several years ago, Madeline Abramson appointed me or nominated me to be on the board at Maryhurst. And for those who may not know, Maryhurst is a nonprofit organization here in Louisville that houses the most severely and traumatized girls who are wards of our state. And these are girls who truly have no place else to go, jail or, or they may even wind up dead. And that's not to be dramatic. It's, it is what it is. And there were so many horrible stories that I heard from these girls, but one that really stuck with me was a girl whose mom had got her high and then trafficked her for sex. And as not just as a parent, but as a human being, thinking of somebody doing that to their own child it's awful. And so as I was going, as Andy was kind of becoming more of a public figure, and I thought about ways that I could use that platform. And it coincided with the former First Lady of Louisiana, Donna Edwards, had sort of had this calling to educate her community about human trafficking and started the Coalition for the Prevention of Human Sex Trafficking. And her inaugural event, she had First Ladies, both Democrat and Republican, to kind of come help launch her nonprofit. And so she called and asked if I would be interested. And it just, it's kind of like the light bulb went off. And this story that I just spoke of, it was like, this is where I'm meant to be and this is what I'm meant to do. And so From there, Donna's goal really, and she's kept it going, even though she's no longer First Lady, she's really taken this organization that she has created and is working to educate, I don't know what, Louisians, the people
Sounds
of
good.
Louisiana,
Very good.
to see the signs and what to do. And so I have taken that that piece that I work with her on, and then I've also created the Human Trafficking Task Force here in Kentucky, and I have brought players from all areas of law enforcement,
Yeah.
judiciary, nonprofits, coming together because everybody works on different pieces of this, but I think it's very important to bring everybody together to not only know what each other is doing, but how we can work together on those pieces that will help victims become survivors and also help to educate those around us on what to look for, what to do, who to call if you see something. And really to hopefully get legislation passed eventually that helps us help these victims become survivors.
So is there more legislation that needs to happen?
Absolutely. There has been legislation that has been introduced. Nothing has passed yet. We have a legislator helping us from Franklin County, Erica Hancock. She is sort of our person in the legislative body who is going to help us not only kind of look at the past legislation that has not either been given a vote or has not passed, but to help us, find other legislators from both sides of the aisle who might want to help us craft legislation and see what we can do to move the needle.
That's great. And I guess what advice would you give to, obviously to our listeners, but one would be advocacy and maybe working to educate their local elected representatives around this topic. But is there anything that you would recommend to the community around being alert, or what are the sort of tips?
Yeah, trafficking in itself is it's huge and it's overwhelming, I think. And so to know a few simple things that just as someone out in the community you can do, I think it makes it a little easier to understand, the small steps that you can take that make a big difference. So someone who is being trafficked might have come into it through coercion, through threats to their loved ones or to themselves. Their ID, their money has been taken from them. They are not at liberty to just simply walk away, or they have been threatened to the point where they don't feel like they have a choice to walk away. A lot of the small things, and I know we say this a lot, if you see something, say something. So for example, a trafficking victim might not make eye contact. They may look malnourished. They may be being coached on what to say or may not be speaking for themselves. And while these signs don't necessarily indicate that someone is being trafficked, if something feels right to you or doesn't feel right to you, call somebody, call the police. Here at U of L, call the campus security. If tell your RA, tell somebody. What I think is, personally, I would rather be 100% wrong and have, made a mistake, but say, I'm so glad you're safe, and not have helped somebody, because truly that one phone call or you just saying, are you okay? And if somebody does not look okay, make the call. You might save that person's life, literally. You might save their life.
Yeah, it's interesting, the different levels of awareness about this in the different states. And, in my other life, I was a dentist. And so I do continue to keep active licenses. But in one of the jurisdictions I have a license, they've actually now made it mandatory that you have actually 3 hours of continuing education around domestic abuse, trafficking, as part of your recertification of your licensure. And yet, in the other jurisdictions, it's silent. There's nothing. So it just seems again that it's not very coordinated, and this is something that people, it needs to be brought more to the public attention broadly.
Yes, and there's definitely a stigma around human trafficking. I think as a society, we have reckoned with a lot of sort of ugly truths, I think, lately, and the conversations are beginning to be more honest about what it actually means to be trafficked. I think sometimes, and even there's misconceptions about what it means to be someone who is sex trafficked or somebody who is stuck in a domestic working environment, you know, and or you know, for spousal abuse. I mean,
Yes.
I think one of the most important things that we can do as a community is not judge people who are in these situations, because we don't know what it's like in their shoes. We don't know how they got there. And so I think that having these more open, honest conversations is also a really positive step forward.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was very honored to be at the law school, the Brandeis Law School here this past a couple of months, and we announced the Mary Byron endowed professorship slash department center that, you know, honors Mary Byron, of course, who, you know, was in the late 1990s, was the victim of a domestic partner situation and was killed. And as a result of her legacy, you know, so much has been done around the alerts now around people, domestic partners, violence. As a matter of fact, when I, you know, was dean of the dental school, we had one such victim of domestic violence. I mean, this is not something that's not out there. It's happening. It's happening, and it's happening too often.
Yes, and it happens in every demographic, every age bracket, every community. And I think that's one of the things that we have learned. It's not just one group of people. It's not one type of person. And so as a dentist, being able to help that one person, it's amazing, because you were given the tools to not only spot it, but to know what to do in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, when you think about dentistry, because most people are pretty good about going every 6 months, and they'll see their dentist. And yet, if they go to their physician, they may not see a physician. They might, you know, see, you know, a PA or, you know, and so the dentist is actually the one that's the most seeing the most people on a constant basis. And so I do think that, you know, it is important for that awareness around, you know, you can be and have a responsibility to intervene.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I've also been, you know, hoping not only from my office specifically, but from the task force. We know that while trafficking happens everywhere at any time, major sporting events are hotspots. So, you know, the World Cup going on right now, it's a huge hotspot for trafficking, for both labor and sex trafficking. And, you know, the Kentucky Derby, while, you know, I think there's so many wonderful aspects and so much to celebrate in the Derby. I have talked to people who were actively being exploited while they were in the Derby in Churchill Downs and in some of the nicer areas. And so I say this because, you know, what we were talking about, not only can it happen anywhere, but there are very simple things at sporting events. You know, signage in the bathroom is an easy one. Everybody uses the bathroom. If there is a sign that says, if you're being trafficked, you know, tell the bathroom attendant. You know, there's sometimes different signs you can give people. I've seen ones in airports that have sign language, SOS, in different languages. There are such simple steps that do not take away from the guest experience. But while we're there, we are a community of spectators, and you can possibly help somebody. And so I think that those are very easy things that we can do to help spot the signs and to help somebody in that situation.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that and providing some sound counsel to our listeners on that. You know, moving beyond that, I mean, I know you're involved in many things from the standpoint, the Family Scholar House is another example. One, of course, we're very proud of the fact that nearly 60% of the folks in the Family Scholar House are actually U of L, either have a degree or in the process of getting a degree. And so we've been just great partnerships with them. Talk to us a little bit about the other activities you're doing. And
Yeah. Well, so Family Scholar House.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glowing. I absolutely love their mission. Their CEO, Kathy Dykstra, is phenomenal. This is a woman who will take the steps and apologize later, but the steps are always in the best interest of the families that she serves.
Yeah.
And she is helping to break the cycle of abuse and poverty, not only for those parents, but the children that see their mostly mothers, sometimes fathers, get a degree and what that means. And I mean, the model of Family Scholar House has actually become a national model.
Yeah.
And to have it start here in Kentucky and to know that U of L is playing such an integral part in the success of these families is huge. So the other thing I really love to do is I love to go into classrooms and read to children.
Yes,
because you never know what you're going to get. And I do find it really funny when teachers, you don't need to ask that question. You don't have to answer that. Ask away. You know, kids are curious and they want to ask. I will proudly tell you my age. I will tell you my shoe size, my favorite color, the name of my first pet. Go ahead and ask it all. But it just, our kids are our most valuable resource. And I just love seeing the hope on their faces and the joy that they have, or those kids who are struggling, just to give them that extra attention that maybe they need to just feel better about, life for a little bit.
Yeah.
It's really fun. And the teachers out there are working so hard and they love what they do. And it really fills my cup to go to schools.
Yeah, I know you do a lot of that. And it's so amazing when you think of the people you remember, right, in your adult life. You think back to your teachers and the impact they made in your life. Yeah. Like you, I would occasionally go in to read to my kids' classrooms, and it was always fascinating when my kids were really young. We would go in and all the boys would be running around, headless chickens, and all the girls would be sitting there and they'd be very polite and they'd be looking, waiting for you to start reading the books. So, it is so much fun to kind of go into that classroom and really interact at that age. And, one of the joys I have in this life is of course, our students. And, it's funny because when we bring students into our board meetings to talk about, we want to highlight a college, everybody just starts smiling. It's amazing. It takes all of the seriousness out of the air because we're all here because of our students and our kids, and it's all a part of what we're doing. Yeah. So I know we've covered a lot. What have we missed? What would you like to talk about? Is there anything that you've been just love to kind of share with our listeners?
Yeah, I know you have 5 children,
yes.
5 boys. That's a lot of boys in one house.
That's a lot of boys.
But we have 2 teenagers. We now have 2 driving teenagers. So
scary.
Look out, Kentucky.
Scary.
So far, so good. But talking about colleges and our oldest Will is in the middle of his college journey. Lila is looking to start her college journey, and it's a really exciting and a little bit stressful, but really exciting time.
Yeah. No, it goes quick. I think, my eldest is 32, believe it or not, and my youngest is 18. So I kind of have that whole journey that I've gone through with the older ones. And it's fun. It's exciting. It's a great time, and, enjoy every bit of it. And I know, like you and Governor Beshear, you're so connected and committed to watching your children grow, but they give us the joy, right?
They do.
Well, I really want to thank you, First Lady Beshear, for being here today. And really, it was just fun to talk to you. I really want to thank you for your advocacy around, serious issues that really are impacting. And we really appreciate what you're doing. And I know there's always the spotlight and the pressure on you. But to continue to do the great things for this Commonwealth of Kentucky, we really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for what you do for our community here in Louisville.
I appreciate that. Well, remember, folks, go Cards.
Go Cards.